Well, friends and colleagues, it's great to be here with you for this interactive session, the very first of the digital edition plenary sessions. This one's session 2 really, but of course we had a fantastic opening presentation earlier today on launching the recent landscape study work as well, which is tremendously interesting. And now we're going to launch into the sort of the topic of the year, really, what's happening with COVID. And but before I do that, you'll see on the screen there we have an excellent panel with us, so they probably don't need much introduction. We have Gilles and Shilpi from the Women's World Banking. We have Jordon, who's with us from Jamaica, where we would have all liked to have been, but he's come to us instead. And Rehan and Syed, Nayyar, Hussain, both from Pakistan. So I think we're covering the world in terms of time zones tremendously well, and it's great to have everybody able to join us for this, as well as the tremendous attendance that we have at this conference, which is really fantastic. Just a couple of housekeeping matters to start off with, and there's a few of those that I have to emphasize to you. One of them is that everybody will be on mute, but you can ask your questions. Please use the Q&A feature to do that, which is at the bottom of the screen. There's a chat and there's a Q&A, but we want to make sure that we get your questions. So if you use the Q&A session, we'll be able to deal with questions directly. And also to remind you, the session is being recorded. So that's useful for everybody to know, and will be available afterwards, along with the presentations and such that we'll have during today's session. So that's good. If you have any technical issues, that's where you should be using the chat, and me and the executive team have done a great job already, and will keep doing a great job, I'm sure. We'll be able to respond to that. One of the things I've asked the executive team to do straight away is to give us a polling question, and I think this is the first time we've used that in the conference. So the first polling question is going to come right up now on the screen. And this is a chance for you to actually give me your opinion on COVID right at the start, and help us to focus on the issues. And really to say, you know, for you, what issue is coming out of COVID that you think's the hardest to address? And now I've got a range of them here for you to choose from. You can only choose one, so that makes it perhaps a little more difficult. The hardest one to address: customers not being effectively covered, products that are not working effectively in this environment, distribution and delivery challenges in this kind of environment, governments and regulators making it difficult to solve problems, or maybe there's something completely different, or maybe you don't know, or in the spirit of Jamaica, we have no problems, because if you've ever been to Jamaica, you'll know there's no problems in Jamaica. That's one of the almost the national mantra there. So, so why don't you respond to that for a minute? Give us a chance to get the feedback from the audience of what the results might be in terms of what's on your mind with COVID, and perhaps we can get the results up. Have a quick look and see what they have to say. It looks like there's a range of challenges there, but distribution and customers come up pretty highly there, as well as potentially also product problems. And the good news, at least from the point of view of the regulators, which is that they're lower down the list. So that's promising news. You don't usually see that. Let's move right into it then, and we'll start with the customers. And I think perhaps that's a good place to start. I'd like to invite Shilpi to give us a perspective on how COVID's actually impacting low-income women. So Shilpi, what do you see from your vantage point?
Thanks, Craig, and thank you everyone for joining. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad to see gender being an important theme across various forums on COVID-19. One key learning from various studies has been that the impact of COVID-19 is actually not gender neutral. This pandemic has exposed the gaps in the system that disproportionately affect the low-income women. Specifically in the context of our today's theme of inclusive insurance, I believe that we need to take a closer look at the following three areas that affect the low-income women drastically. One is the impact on livelihoods and food security. Second is impact on their health and access to healthcare services. And lastly, access and utilization of insurance by the low-income women. In terms of the impact on livelihoods, most women work in informal and semi-formal sectors. For example, ILO estimates that more than 95% of women in Asia and 89% of women in sub-Saharan Africa work in informal sector. And these sectors are not protected by any labor laws or social security schemes. Women also form a large part of the workforce in manufacturing and hospitality industries, and these have been hit the hardest by COVID-19. Secondly, in terms of the impact on their health, majority of the health workers are women, which makes them more exposed to the risk of COVID-19. The healthcare resources have also been mobilized towards responding to the immediate need of the pandemic, which has made the treatment of non-COVID related conditions almost inaccessible for the rest of the population. For women specifically, it means reduced access to maternal and gynecological healthcare services. Women also play the role of caregiver in their families, and the pandemic and the lockdown have increased their burden of this care. Lastly, across the world in many different countries, a sharp increase in gender-based violence has been reported. And one issue that is quite underrated is the issue of mental health. A recent research from Care International found that 27% of women reported stress as a key impact of COVID-19 compared to only 10% of men. In terms of their access to risk mitigation tools, there are some points to consider. Women across the globe have less confidence in their ability to gather financial resources in case of emergencies. They invariably end up dipping into their savings or selling productive assets or borrowing from informal sources to meet their unexpected financial needs. And in today's time, they're actually mobilizing their savings on basic sustenance rather than investing in their children's health and education. While men are more likely to die from COVID-19, it's the women who are left behind, who are feeling the pressure of having no safety net or inheritance, and they are at a greater risk of being pushed into poverty. Lastly, our team at Women's World Banking is currently studying the data from 5 health microinsurance schemes offered by microfinance intermediaries across different countries, which cover over 2 million lives. And we have found some gaps just on the surface while we continue to dig deeper. The first is a challenge that the microfinance industry is facing. That is, a large proportion of their clients are not able to repay the loans. And as a result, they are also defaulting on their insurance premium, which is leading to lapse in their coverage of insurance. Secondly, some microinsurance schemes do not include pandemic cover, so they are not providing the much needed financial protection for low-income families in this time. Lastly, the lockdown disrupted the regular business operations of the intermediaries and insurers, so it's taking longer for claim settlement. To conclude, I believe this is an opportunity for the insurance industry to take a closer look at the data and to understand these gaps with a gender lens and develop a more inclusive response. Thanks, Craig. Yeah.
Yes, the magic mute button. Thanks very much. Yes, I think that's one of the real highlights in terms of the wide-ranging effect that the pandemic has on not just the risk people are facing, but the way they go about facing those risks. Does this ring true for your customers also, Rehan? Perhaps you could share your thoughts.
Actually, yes, I can relate to a lot of stuff Shilpi has said, Greg. So, I mean, for example, so the way we see, I mean, it was actually the challenges in terms of access and delivery. So as she mentioned that, when so there were like, multiple impacts on, in terms of delivery. So you either sell through or make it available through MFIs. So MFIs are either, you know, shut down, or they were rescheduling their loans. So people don't have, like, you know, more, you know, loans to be given insurance. And some actually stopped lending altogether. And then we also sell insurance through physical, you know, facilities like call centers and all. And then we had to shut down call centers as well, or we had to reduce the capacity to a quarter or a third at max because of, you know, social distancing requirements. That impacted as well. Then the other thing Shilpi mentioned was health. So, and I have a very interesting, you know, feedback on that. So people, so our health, so we sell like lots of insurance, right? Life, PA, funeral, health, and all that. And so the health take-up went very high, right? So everyone wanted to, thanks to WhatsApp and the disinformation and all that. So people were too much concerned about their health, right? So everyone wanted to be getting into health insurance. And we saw some surge in our health insurance take-up. But that's the other thing, right? So because there was a low economic activity, people didn't have money. So they were like, impulsive decision was to go for health insurance because they saw it as a rescue. But when it came to payment, we saw like a dip in payments, in renewals. People didn't have money to pay that. So that actually gave us the idea that people want to have insurance and they're going for it, but they don't have money to pay because of, low economic, activity. And then the other challenge we faced was that people were really, they wanting some consultancy sort of a thing, right? So normally the health insurance, as we sell the micro health, that's to do with the inpatient. And people were wanting to have, so everyone was having symptoms. All of us would have gone through that process and, checking on the WHO website, is it COVID, is it not? So imagine, a farmer or a rickshaw driver, a taxi driver. So they wanted a doctor, right? And we were supporting them with, digital consultancy and all that. But I think they wanted more than that. That's the area in terms of product I think we lacked. The people wanted an actual doctor, not just a phone or an app telling you that this is not COVID. They wanted a physical brick and mortar and a human doctor to tell them, no, you're fine, don't worry about it. This is just a common cold or stuff like that. So yeah, so I think I would relate on a lot of things with Shilpi in our customers. Correct?
And how have you changed your actual operations in response to the COVID? I mean, it's one thing for the clients to have different needs, but have you had to actually change the way you do things to meet those needs, or is it more sort of?
I think the biggest challenge we had was
bigger volume.
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge we had was delivery, and COVID brought some challenges and some solutions along. Interestingly. So you must have seen the common joke on internet that, who is behind your fast tracking your digitization in your company, CTO, CEO, or COVID. So it was COVID. So we opened up lots of digital channels. And I mean, if I tell you something interesting, that we actually sold more of health insurance in COVID than we did otherwise. Because you give a shout, we opened up robocalls, we opened up SMS, in-app channels, and people will just get it, right? But that was like, we are addressing that solution of delivery through some means, and we are addressing all of those solutions in our capacity. For example, we brought in digital channels to address the delivery problem. We brought in digital consultancy, doctor on a phone, teledoc, to address that outpatient need. However, that's a separate story that, we were solving one thing, but the other thing was there. So people were getting insurance, but they were not able to continue with that, to pay for that. So that was, I mean, it was some problems were solved, some were not.
Right, yes. Well, maybe we can turn to the Caribbean, Jordon, to get your view on what you're seeing there and also what you might see as the biggest challenge that you're facing in terms of COVID. What's sort of the big issues that are yet to be resolved? Jordon.
Thanks, Greg, and thanks, team, for a wonderful comments so far. Well, the picture for the Caribbean is pretty much similar to in most countries around the world. When the pandemic hit the Caribbean, probably about early March, most governments unilaterally kind of closed their borders put in various quarantine measures and so forth. And this really has done really well in helping the Caribbean to manage the cases of COVID. But nonetheless, despite the numbers in terms of cases and even deaths being very low within the Caribbean economy has really significantly been impacted. And we see that, some of the major earners for the Caribbean would be, mining, agriculture, which we know those were down before, but tourism is a huge part of our Caribbean's economy. In fact, in most countries, anywhere between 40 to up to 90%. So significantly impacting. And we know that global travel is down. There's hardly anybody getting on a plane these days. And definitely, cruise ships are definitely down. So that has significantly impacted the income of many persons within the Caribbean. And we can see this for the foreseeable future. So what it means is that there are many persons who have been displaced, many persons without a regular source of income that they would have had in the past. And as a result, it really has shown up the gap in terms of inclusion, financial inclusion. And just like even in Reham's case, we're seeing that distribution and the ability to provide these solutions to our customers have been a challenge. And some of the factors involves regulation, and involves the ability or penetration of digital space, whether it's product deliveries or the ability for companies to actually utilize the digital space. So that has really set us back a little bit. But we do see that there's opportunity, and there's a lot of learnings that we've actually gained through this process.
Great. Gilles, I think you might have a good perspective on the sorts of changes that could be needed, and where things are heading towards the future. We've talked about the challenges we've had so far, but I mean, what do you think are the challenges for the future and the changes that you're seeing might be needed? Maybe you're on mute. Yes, you're on mute, Gilles. You have to unmute.
Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah,
yes, we can hear you now.
Because I was sharing my screen. Okay. Thank you, Craig. Yes, I think the delivery model will have to change, actually, and I want to show that with a very simple model that we call the Swiss cheese model. So in the Swiss cheese model, actually, the model says that to be successful, microinsurance has to actually pass 3 filters. So the first one is the hospitalization. So clients need to be able to go to the hospital if I'm thinking of the health coverage. Then the second screening is about their ability to file claim. And then the last one would be their ability to collect the claim payment. And when you think about the result of COVID, you see actually only the result. And at every step in the process, there are events that are actually stopped. So for example, if you take hospitalization, you can ask the question, what has the government actually taken as measures? Can people go to the hospital and get proper treatment, or are the hospitals actually closed? Do they have access to the hospital? If you are in a lockdown like the one that happened in Uganda, where public transportation was closed, then people can't even go to the hospital. Another scheme that we're looking at in Morocco has actually an ambulance. So if a client is calling to be brought to the hospital, they will have access to the hospital. And last but not least, you can also have the fear to go to the hospital, and especially for women, this is going to be very important. We're going to show you on one of our next slides about maternity. But once you've passed that hurdle, then you also have the question about how you can file your claim. So Rehan was speaking about the digital solution. We work more with financial institutions like microfinance and banks, where clients have an interaction with the partner, and they would file the claim on location. So the question would be, are the branches open? Can the client go and file the claim? In Jordan, what happened is that mandated by government, the branches were closed for 2 months. So the clients are not able to file a claim if they wanted. So that's where you need to think about having a digital channel to file a claim. And also thinking of how you would potentially exclude women in the case of women's well banking, because we know that women would tend to be less digital savvy and would have a tendency to own less phones. There's a 15% gap in Sub-Saharan Africa, 25% gap in phone ownership in Asia. So claim filings is also an issue. And also you have, when you go to a branch, you need to take transportation. So you have an additional exposure, and this is where fear comes again. So once you've passed this one, you can actually also be blocked by the last one, which is what is the ability of the insurance company to pay claims? Because everyone is in lockdown, you know, is the insurance company working at full capacity or not? And are you actually able to do the paperwork remotely from home? So it takes quite a bit of luck to actually be able to file a claim. So what we've done in our study, we've looked at a number of schemes, and we'll share the slides later on. But from the data, what we see is that in 2018 and 2019, the patterns have some similarities, giving us a sort of benchmark, as you see there. So the gray and brown bars of 2018, 2019, and 2020 is in blue. We're seeing a drop in the case rates of hospitalization from 2020 onwards, which is when COVID hit and the lockdown measures were manifesting. And all of these are actually due to the various screening that I was showing on my previous slide. So the reasons that we are starting to identify as we go through the study is a low reporting of claims because of the the branch shutdown, the customers not going to the hospital. I'm going to speak about that just in a second. And the delay by the financial service provider and the insurer to approve the claims just because of the lockdown. On the last slide that I have, and then I'll give it back to you, I wanted to emphasize what it means for women. On this one, we are just showing some data that we have from our partner Lead Foundation in Egypt. When you think of maternity, and we know that women would take care of themselves when they give birth, in a situation where you have COVID, then they are scared to go to the hospital. Against what many people may be thinking, most women go and deliver their babies in the hospital in Egypt. And when you think of the maternal mortality rate there of 37 per 100,000, it's way under the Sustainable Development Goal of 80. So when I look at this curve, I'm very concerned because women are actually changing because of the COVID situation. They are not able to go to the hospital and receive a claims payment. So this is where we need to think about changes in the delivery model. And two thoughts about that would be, the digital payment, but also the ability to consult a doctor via the telephone to actually be channeled if there is something happening during the maternity. And I know that Rehan, you guys have been developing such products. So I think that's what COVID is forcing us to think about.
Yes, thanks very much. I think that's very interesting, and we've picked up now a couple of times, not just on the situation for customers, but then also the challenges for distribution and delivery of service. But I was wondering, Jordon, if you could perhaps give us your perspective also on what you see as some of the sort of product side initiatives that might be needed in the current situation.
Well, I believe that we have quite a bit of ways to go in terms of developing, products that really help to solve the needs of this market. Those are underserved. A lot of our products, will be still focused on, traditional life, some traditional health, and then a lot of products focus on weather-related risk. But I mean, COVID has shown that really there's a lot more that we need to be looking at. There's a lot more things that can cause disruption in a person's income which we really need insurance to provide a solution for. And so I think the learnings coming out of this for us is definitely to look in that area. Another huge challenge that we have, I mean, is the various and complex regulatory framework within the Caribbean. I mean, I was happy to see in the poll that regulatory issues were very low, but in the Caribbean, it's still a concern. And the reason is because we do have, I mean, from the 30 plus countries that make up the Caribbean, I mean, they all have their various regulations, they all have their different sovereigns, and not necessarily everybody's on the same page. There's a lot of discussion that happens, but there are different regulators at different phases in the process of inclusion. Some a little bit more, adaptable to it. Others are still a little way off. And because of that, you find that, companies, even those that are regional insurance carriers, do have a huge hurdle, and they don't really benefit from economies of scale because there are various requirements in the different countries. So whether it's capital requirements, whether it's requirements for entry in other ways, even product development maybe have different requirements. And as a result of that, it really makes it difficult and really increases the cost to really create and to distribute products that really can help this market. And a big thing in the Caribbean is the ability to scale up. I mean, the population across the Caribbean is about 40 million. And I mean, if you take out 3 countries, Haiti, Domrep, and Cuba, which makes up about 65, almost 70% of the population in the Caribbean, you're really looking at very small numbers. And so that's why it's important to kind of have this uniform regulatory standard across the Caribbean, which helps to drive financial inclusion, because we really need a scale across, and no one country can really provide enough numbers to make the products and the solutions affordable across the board. And so I believe that if we have some regulatory consensus, if we have reform from our regulation throughout the Caribbean, I think that would actually help push the agenda for inclusion, because then we'll make it a lot more affordable for persons to be able to access such services. And then there's technology. I mean, we've heard that highlighted throughout this discussion so far, that one thing that we've learned through COVID is the ability for customers to interact with us a lot more remotely, whether it's the claims processing, but even from the enrollment process. There's a high penetration of mobile within the Caribbean, but there's still the ability for companies or being a little bit behind in terms of utilizing that mobile penetration to have products offered in a manner that can be easily accessed by customers. And so, it really has helped us to see that that needs to be addressed very quickly. And we're seeing a huge gaps in that. I mean, for example, in Jamaica, we saw when the government issued their stimulus package that there needed to have been, some changes so that persons could actually access it, because many persons were unbanked, many persons weren't utilizing the digital space. And we see all, even with schooling, I mean, many schools are shut now because, the need for social distancing or physical distancing. But then again, there's a setback because many students are not able to access the digital platforms to be able to get their education. And that transitions right into the financial services. So there's need to be reform. There needs to be a lot more push there. And I believe the collaboration across the different governments, across the different regulators throughout the Caribbean can really help to push this agenda.
Yes, well, that's a nice segue into the need for responsive regulators. And we do have a regulator here from Pakistan. But before we go to you, let's just, I took the opportunity to gather a bit more information from some of your colleagues as well in Africa and Latin America. So I have a very short recording of that, which I'd just like to share with people. And this includes comments from SEMA, from Costa Rica, and also from South Africa. It just runs for a couple of minutes.
It is important to be reminded of the specific situation of SEMA, which is a unique regulatory body in charge of the insurance supervision across 14 countries. That means we need to deal with 14 different sovereign governments and their measures to face the pandemic at different stages. An official letter was issued in May 2020 by the CIMA Secretary General with recommendations and guidelines, mainly to ensure business continuity, fair treatment of policyholders, and keep companies safe and solvent. Recommendations include measures such as having a crisis management unit within the insurers, promotion of digitalized or virtual activities or services.
The FSCA's first response to COVID was to recognize the challenges that industry might face in complying with the various regulatory requirements. So as a first step, we granted extensions to industry for the submissions of various types of statutory returns, competency deadlines, and the comment periods by which responses must be submitted to the FSCA in respect of amendments to laws that were under consultation.
En el caso de Costa Rica, las primeras reacciones ante el COVID-19 en el mes de marzo fueron, primero que todo, poner a salvo al personal, enviarlo a casa. Dichosamente, al ser una institución joven, habíamos iniciado con una institución cero papel, muy automatizada, entonces ese proceso, ese paso fue realmente rápido y sin mayor contratiempo. El 100% del personal trabajando en casa prácticamente una semana después de declarar emergencia. En segundo lugar, revisar nuestra planeación. Como toda institución pública o privada, pues tenemos un plan operativo que seguir durante el año. Y aquí el concepto fue enfoquémonos en lo urgente, atender la pandemia, que el mercado esté funcionando, asegurarnos que los issues de solvencia empiecen a ser monitoreados también y atendidos, asegurarnos más información cuando fuera relevante en ciertos tópicos, y planificar y posponer lo importante. Toda superintendencia, todo regulador tiene sus planes de desarrollo, capacitación, proyectos, normativa, donde si bien son elementos muy importantes, pues ante la emergencia deberían ser pospuestos, ¿no?
A cross-cutting theme that underlined the FSCA's expectations was the responsibility of financial institutions to proactively communicate with all stakeholders and customers regarding these matters.
But also it is a good opportunity for all players to rethink the way we conduct our business. Coming to microinsurance, COVID-19 highlighted the need to provide small coverages for the maximum. As we can see, there is no need to spend huge amount to prevent or to heal the disease, but small efforts in a timely approach will keep us safe. Even if we were not well prepared for this COVID-19, it brought to our mind a real sense of urgency for innovative, inclusive insurance.
So with those comments, Nayyar, perhaps we could invite you to give us your thoughts on what you've been seeing as the priority initially in terms of regulatory responding, perhaps building on these comments from Africa and Latin America.
Yeah, thanks, Craig, for giving me an opportunity to express our views. Actually, I see this pandemic kept the regulators quite busy on meeting many challenges. On one side, we were also adjusting with the new way of work. Secondly, there was a demand from the industry to relax many things. So first, actually, we called a meeting of the life insurance companies to issue a clarification to their policyholders that their products provide the coverage against pandemic. So this boosted the confidence of the policyholders that the life insurance products in Pakistan, they do cover the pandemic coverages. Secondly, we issued a guidance to the life insurance companies to adopt to digital modes of accepting premium payments and reducing the physical documentation requirements from the policyholders. And then we also then we issued the guidance to the insurance companies to extend the grace period to be granted to the policyholders. So many life insurance companies extended the grace period for the receipt of premium. Then SECP also issued a guidance to the non-life insurance sector to grant the premium holidays to the motor policies, because during the lockdown there was less traffic and less usage of vehicles. So the insurance companies, we asked the non-life insurance companies to provide relief to the policyholders. Then on the due to this COVID-19, there was the market value of the financial instruments were depressed. So the insurance companies requested the regulator to grant relaxation from the International Accounting Standard number 39, which requires the insurance companies to record the assets and liabilities at the market value. So we grant relaxation temporarily to the insurance industry from IS 39. Then there is again there's International Financial Reporting Standard number 16, which requires which is on the leasing side. So to adopt that standard, the insurance companies have to restructure their lease agreements. So we granted relaxation from this IFRS 16 to the insurance industry. And then at the other end, we also accepted the different submissions through electronic means. For example, products submission requirements. So insurance companies used to submit the products through physically. So during this COVID-19, we accepted the submissions through electronically and rapid the approval process. During this period, we saw many more products developed on the health side because there were more demand for the health insurance. So so these were the different challenges we were required to respond, and then we did provide these relaxations here.
So we will provide I think the video and the longer stretch of that video. I recorded much more from your colleagues, so that will be part of the after the conference on the website. But also the Access to Insurance initiative are following the movements of regulators all around the world, and they have a response tracker of their survey being updated, and I'll share that with all the attendees in the chat. But perhaps you could say a little bit more now about not just what's been happening up until now, that sort of responding to the current crisis, but also what do you see as perhaps how you're thinking about the longer term going forward? Has this permanently changed the world from a regulator's perspective?
Yeah, actually, our focus has been for the last few years is that the industry should adopt the more technology actually. So in order to encourage the innovation, SECP issued guidelines on the regulatory sandbox in late December 2019, and we started our first cohort in March 2020, and that SECP sandbox was for the insurance sector, for the capital markets, and for the mutual fund industry as well. So we received many applications from our first cohort, and 2 applications were received regarding digital insurer actually. So we are actually promoting the digital insurers. So one application is for the digital only insurer, and one is for the digital broker actually. So we are actually promoting the technology in the use of delivery in the service in Pakistan. And I think in next about in 10 days we are also conducting a roundtable on a digital only insurer regime in Pakistan. Yeah.
So there's a lot of change in terms of what we're likely to see in the future. Perhaps Shilpi, you could share with us, where do you see the future going in terms of responding now? How's the world going to be different going forward?
In terms of responding to how the world is going to be in the near future would be really how we are able to respond to the gender needs, because we can't take one solution fit all kind of response. And I really wanted to share with you how the journey of different segments have been impacted because of COVID. And we tried to do interviews with women who have suffered from COVID, and how their lives have been impacted pre-COVID and during the COVID, and hospitalization and non-hospitalization and after the COVID. And I think that will give us a lot of insight in terms of what is the way forward for the insurance companies, the intermediaries, and the regulators to think about designing not only new products, but also the delivery models, the awareness models, and the digital, how to use digital in scenarios which can have a better impact on women. So let me just share my screen just for a second, and tell me if you can see it. You see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So where insurance has made the most impact is basically where in the customer's journey, we see that in terms of their whole journey around walking through COVID, before COVID or before the pandemic hit them, before they contracted COVID, there was a general denial among the population that it won't happen to me. And for some women, the financial pressure was very high. The pressure of putting food at the table was preventing them from stopping to work during the lockdown. And in some cases, women also did not have access to the right information. If there are especially the language barriers or limited literacy, or in case one of the women quoted in Pakistan that there was a rumor about how the doctors were killing the patient in this area. So that was also preventing them from seeking treatment. Women who were actually diagnosed with COVID and they went through the hospitalization, or their spouses were hospitalized, the two biggest pressure for them was to really arrange for money and getting good care at the hospitals. In Egypt, for example, the women told us that the hospital staff itself was scared, and they were doing only the bare minimum, while no one from the family was allowed to visit them. So it was surely a stressful situation for those people who were hospitalized. And those people who were actually able to receive insurance benefit were, I think, they felt that the insurance claim was helping them in reducing their indebtedness, because they borrowed from informal sources in order to arrange for the expenses for the hospitalization. And as we learned that their livelihoods were also impacted, and they had limited resources and limited income. So any money that they received from the claims was helping them to also maintain their consumption levels. They were able to buy food for the family. They were able to buy necessary supplies for the family during the time of lockdown. So insurance really created a positive experience for them. Most of these people are really the first-time users of insurance, and I think this was an amazing experience, and it will go a long way in building trust for them in the future when they look at more unique products and more products that can fulfill their needs. And lastly, I think there are impacts and there are effects that we are seeing from how their lives have changed after COVID. There's still financial pressures that prevail. People are not able to prioritize the children's health, and expenses which build the family's future for a longer term. They are not able to prioritize their resources into that because their livelihoods are really contained. There is also some social pressure that we observed in the communities, which is again interesting, and we will have to see how this unfolds in the future. And lastly, I think COVID has long-lasting impact on the health of the people, which the scientists and doctors are still discovering. And but this is the story of people who were able to use insurance. People who were hospitalized and were not able to use insurance were the ones who were left behind. And they were diagnosed with COVID, but they did not have the chance to get hospitalized. They were quarantining at home. And these women also face the same consequences of loss of income, high medical expenses for managing their tests and medicines, and added financial and emotional stress. But they were not able to benefit from insurance because they were not hospitalized. And these schemes were actually either the hospital cash schemes or the Mediclaim schemes that these women had access to, but they were not able to use. So they had genuine questions that, we also had the same consequences of COVID. We also went through the same financial and emotional pressure, but why are the intermediaries and why are the insurance companies not helping us at this time when we need it the most? So to answer your question, Craig, I think there's definitely a vital role that insurance is playing in plugging some of the financial holes for the women. And women who have benefited from their insurance, of course, perceive greater value compared to those who are not able to benefit from it. There is trust that has come from proof of insurance that it pays when it's needed, but only for those who are able to use it. So I think it gives an opportunity to the regulators, insurers, and intermediaries to really get ahead in the game. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the future, including designing a holistic model for the different needs of the different segments which are impacted disproportionately.
Yes, thanks. And Rehan, what do you think the future holds from your perspective?
So I think, Craig, the videos you played from our friend from the regulatory side, so in the end, he nailed it actually. So he said that something like this, that COVID created a sense of urgency in inclusive insurance. And I couldn't agree more with him. So I believe that this 2020 has actually fast-tracked this, the digital and the inclusive insurance evolutionary process. So, but one thing concerns me, right? One thing is that all of us, including myself, we are talking about COVID in past tense. That actually is the biggest concern. So as if like we have come, through that. It hasn't happened, right? And the trouble will be, so in my view, I mean, the products, everyone got a realization that, what products do we need? People, like lots of us said that, people need, very simple products, no strings attached. People need outpatient products. People go to the hospital, they don't get, they don't go to the hospital because there was, we heard that hospitalization claims were low. The reason is that people were scared of going to the hospital for any reason, because they were patients of COVID-19 over there, right? So they avoided going to the hospital as much as possible, which means that they needed more kind of products. They wanted a product where they could go to a clinic, at the corner of their street and get their symptoms checked and get that money paid. This product didn't exist, right, in most of the markets. Now, second, operational processes. Now, we as MicroEnsure have been using this WhatsApp for claim payment for the past like 7-8 years, right? And there were still some insurance companies who were not accepting those. They always wanted the physical paper. And it was amusing to see that the regulators issued circular all over the emerging market, instructing insurance companies to stick to digital copies of claim documents. And overnight, the whole industry moved to that. The third thing, payment, right? The Swiss cheese, right? So digitization fast track. So people wanted to have a wallet so that they get the claim paid. And then it comes to channels, digital channels. We saw that the magic they have done. I mean, we have sold 750,000 policies in 3 months between April, May, and June in one of our markets with one of our telco client, and that happened. Now, and then speed to market, right? So regulators have been responding to the market demand very fast, and the thing they will approve in 4 weeks, they were approving in 1 week. So everyone was like literally behaving in the right order. Now the problem is that, let me start from the customer. So the place where I'm sitting in Pakistan, so June, they started lifting, the curve started going down, and then they lifted, lockdowns and all. And by July, the business was all about like, pre-COVID. And the uptick we were seeing in health insurance policies came down to normal. So people thought that's gone. So it's a once in 100-year kind of an event. Now that's fine. That's customers, they reflected what they need. But my view is that as industry players, as providers, as brokers, as insurers, or as regulators, or as technology providers, we have to grab what COVID has taught us. So we need to change, and we have empirical evidence. We have, like, a number of case studies that when you go digital, people embrace that, people want that. So that's a case study that's proven. So now we need to, in my opinion, we have to work on every department, and it's digitization technology. I mean, we are working, for example, as MicroEnsure, we are working on bringing AI for claim processing. And that's, again, that's a blessing of COVID, right? So that's where it goes. So in my opinion, the future holds simple products, very, low ticket products, short duration, digital operations, digital distribution, and then speed to market. So regulators will come up with, like, if you're like not changing the fundamental nature of the product, if you're squeezing a year-long product into like a day-long product, just do it. Just don't come to us, something like that. So if regulators are getting like 20 products approval in a week, if they start getting 200, they don't want to approve every single one of them, right? So I think that's where the whole evolutionary process will go. It will really become like a FMCG, something like that.
And maybe we'll give the last word looking ahead to Jordon. What do you see, Jordon, as the lasting changes that we might be seeing coming in the future?
Well, I really agree with Rehan and echo all his comments. I believe that COVID really has helped us to see how we can do things a lot differently. In the Caribbean, I mean, we've had this discussion around inclusion and inclusive insurance for quite a bit of time. I mean, there's been a lot of research done. There's been a lot of assistance provided. And I do believe that this conference being hosted in the Caribbean would have really helped to push the agenda. But it maybe it's timing that it got delayed because COVID has helped to highlight some of the fundamental things, and I think has really provided us now with case studies that we really can demonstrate that we really need to change how we do certain things. And even in the nimbleness about how we change and implement products from the regulatory side, I think that is also will change because we can see how easily we can adapt to things that we thought couldn't have happened in the past, or would have taken a length of time to do research and analysis. We've been able to do it within weeks, within months, just because we've been forced to do it with COVID. So I believe that this, having this conference now in the Caribbean, hopefully next year or sometime, in the near future, it's really going to be timely because we'll be able to now learn from the various examples of the forerunners. The many countries in Asia and Africa was really been pioneers in pushing inclusion of insurance. And so to me, I think it's really, there's a lot of opportunity. I believe the future will be bright. I believe that we'll be able to get it done this time around, just because of learnings coming from COVID and the ability to have the discussions happening even more so, utilizing forums like this. So I'm very excited about the opportunities that will come in the future.
Well, that's good news, and I'm sure that that Dirk will be very pleased to hear that the opportunity to return to the Caribbean in the future will hopefully enable us to put some fuel on the fire that's already been lit. That would be fantastic. I just want to remind people that the Q&A feature is there, so you can put your questions in, and there are some questions there already. We might just touch on a couple of them as we go along here. And I thought maybe one of the first ones I might pick up on from the different conversations we've had so far is perhaps for you, Gilles, regarding this whole question of I think what the opportunity is for insurance companies, that customers might want them to react differently. To what extent do you think the insurance companies have perhaps there's something that you would say to them, this is what we'd really like?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So I think Rehan was mentioning some of the points on, getting digital, and insurance companies tend to think that the hurdle is actually from the regulatory perspective. and then the regulator has to issue a guideline saying that you can actually use digital records to handle claims. But very often, I must say, this is also a market practice. If you read the regulation, you don't need a change in the regulation. It's just like the whole market is just doing it, you know, because they used to have paperwork, so they just keep the paperwork. So I think it's having that leap of faith and also speaking with the regulator to actually make things really happen and work as partners. I will name two things that I think would be really crucial. When we're looking at the numbers, in essence, in our schemes, we have no exclusion whatsoever. So it means that maternity and pre-existing is covered, the pandemics would be covered, and yet we see that there is a drop in the number of claims. So it means that, as absurd as it sounds, during the COVID period, the insurance companies are going to make more profit, provided they receive the premium. So the two things I had that crossed my mind was to say, well, you can actually be the first mover as the insurance company and go to your clients and say, you know, have a moratorium on the premium, or make sure that you know, if the client is finding a claim late or they haven't paid the premium, that you give them the opportunity to actually pay that missing premium, because that's something that they were actually buying. But because of the COVID downturn, they may have some issues with the business. And so as a consequence, the cover would actually lapse. So you need to find a way to speak to your clients and give them a chance to actually still be covered. Another thought that we had is when you're a low-income customer, and especially a woman, you would actually work in the informal sector. So you would actually be dependent on your ability to actually go out to other households, or having your clients coming to your shop or to your house to actually buy and sell goods. So when you are actually getting COVID and you have even mild symptoms and you go to the hospital, if you get a positive test, but you don't have really strong symptoms, the hospitals and very often the government are actually mandating you to stay at home and see no one. So you're actually quarantined. So you can't actually be in hospital, which has the consequence, because these hospital cash products, very often what they provide is also an income replacement. So the client ends up not triggering the policy because they're not spending the nights in hospital and they're not getting specific treatment. They're just waiting for COVID to pass. And so I think there's an opportunity for insurance companies always, and I would kind of emphasize that. I mean, I'm not asking the insurance companies to do charity work. I mean, they can do charity work as part of their CSR, but what I'm asking them is look at your data early enough to see where the things are going, so that you can actually adapt your answer in your current product for your clients, so that they have this impression that you're speaking to them. I mean, in the words of Rehan's colleague, Richard Leftley, who always said, you know, people don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm going to buy insurance today. They want to have protection. So the issue with insurance is very often, once you've made a sale, you don't have a contact with the client. And so I think insurance companies really to kind of engage with their clients, offering remote support like telemedicine as an add-on for these clients, so that they can actually remove the fear and also give the clients the impression that what they bought may have been slightly different, but we are in this together. And because of the trust that they have or trying to build with their clients, that they actually give that protection to the clients, whatever happens.
And maybe Syed, Director Hussain, I can pick up with you also on this question, and we have two questions actually that I think your perspective would be interesting on. One of them is this question, you know, to what extent do you think insurance companies have still got something to do, something that perhaps you would suggest generally to the attendees at this session is important for insurers? And then the second question we have here, which I think is an interesting one, is whether you see from your perspective the possibility that pandemics would be something that could be insured going forwards. Is that something that's under discussion in Pakistan? You have to unmute. There we go. That's good.
Yeah, I think, yeah, basically the issue, I mean, is I think the insurance sector basically they have to adopt technology actually for the distribution of products actually, you know. Uh, for the time being, what we have observed that the conventional insurers actually they are having a typical market which they are serving. So they are not, they are actually, and most of their focus has been digitalization of the policy acquisition process rather than the claims process or policy servicing. So we are actually putting regulatory pressure basically on the insurance companies that when they initiate digitalization, they should also focus should be on also on policy servicing and claims as well. So not only on policy acquisition. And secondly, I think they should pass on the benefit of digitalization in terms of lower premiums and higher allocation products actually, because with the growing use of technology, I think the role of conventional typical agency structure would be less. So insurance companies need to develop these channels actually, and they also need to develop suitable products based on these channels.
And perhaps we'll pick another question here for you, Rehan. You might be the closest one to being able to answer this one. What do you think, Peter Render has asked us, what do you think the relevance of the hospital cash product is in this COVID context? I mean, I know that, you know, to some extent, people could say, well, how does this work if getting to hospital is problematic? And as we saw from the Women's World Banking data, that there's a bit of an aversion to actually going to hospital anyway.
Yeah, I think Peter is asking hospital cash product as opposed to the cashless medical insurance, right? So to answer the first aspect of the comparison you did, correct. So inpatient versus outpatient. So there is clearly a need for an outpatient insurance product, right? That's one. So people don't want to go to the hospital. A lot of people, and the government's actually brought in this digital, consultancy concepts. But as we discussed, I mean, our personal experience is that people normally would like to discuss dermatology over a phone, or they would discuss the health improvements, right? Something like that. When it comes to real health, they would like to go to a physical doctor. So that's that, inpatient versus outpatient. Now coming to hospital cash versus cashless. So I think one thing COVID has done is reinforce the significance and the utility and the importance of hospital cash product. Imagine someone who is sick, they want to go to the hospital, not for COVID, but for any other reason, and they've been out of their jobs, right? So if it is a cashless product, then they get free treatment whatsoever. And then the hospital is not responsible for or the insurance company is not responsible for their loss of wages because of COVID or economic, slowdown. But hospital cash product pays them a flat cash. They can utilize that towards, payment of their health expenses, plus, meet some of the lost wages. So I think one thing which COVID has done is reinforce the utility of hospital cash product for emerging customers as opposed to the other version of health insurance.
I mean, it's interesting that to some extent we have a discussion about perhaps how products could be different, perhaps how services could be different. Maybe I think it's a good point made that the COVID has sort of highlighted this, Jordon. You mentioned this rather than necessarily being the sort of thing that caused it to come out of the blue from nowhere. So I think we're seeing these challenges with products and services and everything that we're doing that could be better. And maybe in retrospect, how we've been doing things wasn't as good as it could have been. One of the areas that I think's got a lot of attention so far is this whole question of, say, business interruption. And sometimes we don't talk about that very much in a microinsurance context. But I'm just wondering, Shilpi, whether you have any views about how customers are being affected by by their lack of access to insurance when it comes to their own, like their enterprises rather than sort of their household risks. Because I think, you know, in an inclusion point of view, perhaps we've made more progress over the last years with risks of our households rather than risks for very small businesses and micro enterprises.
Yeah, for sure. I think the business interruptions during COVID have been really severe on the low-income segment because, as I mentioned in the beginning, most of these workers have their own businesses, their own enterprises, they work in informal economy, or those who have some sort of secure jobs, they work in factories or hospitality sector, which were impacted very, very highly by the COVID pandemic. So lack of access to insurance, not only for their household risk mitigation, but also for their business needs, is really something that that has affected their ability to maintain their consumption levels. The business disruptions have impacted the income, and I think the access and usage, let me put it this way. So if they have access to insurance, then they have not been able to use it because sometimes the loss of income hasn't been covered because this was excluded during the pandemic, or this was not appropriately covered in terms of the coverage provided in their products. And the business disruptions across the country due to their access to products and claims were also disrupted because their movement was disrupted. They were staying at home. They did not have access to emergency cash, right? So whether, say, for example, in a lot of countries, the government started making payments from G to P. So if they had mobile, if they had bank accounts, they were able to access some emergency cash to maintain their consumption levels. But in those cases, women were also left behind because they don't have access to KYC, or they don't have access to mobile banks or accounts that are linked with their KYC. So they were also delayed in getting their payments for the emergency cash that the government was dispersing. So these disruptions really affected their lives. And we saw in some of these interviews that they were making really hard choices and putting on hold some of the expenses that could have met their business needs, or they could have expanded their businesses or invested back in their household. So those lives were disrupted. So I think from insurance perspective, there are different aspects in terms of business insurance, in terms of health insurance, and in terms of even providing long-term savings products so that they can save for their business, save for their future, and become more self-reliant on their savings, which will be really important for these segments to have.
I think one of the things that's highlighted for me as well is that the debate about business interruption is often about having a sort of a pandemic exclusion, but I think a lot of people are saying that what customers actually want is protection against their business being interrupted. And it's not the exclusion might be part of the problem, but if we didn't have the exclusion, it's still dependent on, in most business interruption policies, dependent on something going wrong that people would claim on, such as a fire or something like that. And if those things haven't happened, then it's still not going to be paying in the current context. And I think the voice of the customer is saying, actually, I need a different kind of policy. Yeah, and maybe that's going to force us to rethink things much bigger. It's also been pointed out to me, friends, that there is a separate session later in the week on hospital cash. So we'll pick up on that too, I think, with others. Let's just see what other questions we might have here about that we can touch on just now. Maybe I'll ask, George Brady's asked a question here about what regulators and governments might do more in the Caribbean to promote inclusion. And perhaps, Jordon, I'll touch base with you on that one. Do you think that it's one thing for, as you said, COVID to have given people some focus and urgency? It's another thing for our conference to come and visit you in the future and give you some more urgency. Do you think there's a role for governments and supervisors, regulators to be looking at advancing inclusion more in the Caribbean?
Most definitely, and it has been a part of the agenda. I just think it's the pace at which we are actually, we're actually pushing or changing the regulatory framework to ensure that we can adapt to the requirements to broaden inclusion. I mean, within the Caribbean, many governments would have put in place, very strict regulations to help shore up the financial system. But over time, we've realized that some of them can be actually curtailed, especially when we're dealing with certain elements of the market. For example, with anti-money laundering regulations, we've seen an adjustment in recent times on how things look in the insurance industry, just because we realize that the risk is different. So I believe it's just being nimble to be able to move the regulation to really afford the ability for others to be included in the financial process is necessary, and we just have to be a little bit more quick at getting it done. And again, I think COVID has really shown us the fact that we can do it. And so we just need to make those changes in the near future.
Maybe Director Hussain, I'll give you the chance to sort of respond on behalf of the regulatory community in terms of the extent that you think that the regulators can play a role in advancing inclusive insurance, particularly to sort of try and address some of these issues that we've heard about in this session.
Definitely, regulators can play an important role because sometimes the market players don't move in the direction in which they should. So regulators can, through encouragement, through mandatory requirements, they can push the inclusive insurance. And the same we are doing in Pakistan, as you know that we had introduced a sandbox, and through sandbox we want to promote the digital insurance. And I think through digital insurance, the large untapped market which has been previously excluded can be covered actually. And so I think the regulators can play a very important role in this.
Catherine is asking whether a specific mandate is important in this, and whether it helps perhaps with the mandate for market development for the supervisor, or whether an explicit mandate about financial inclusion would be useful.
Actually, in Pakistan, the market development has been a specific regulatory mandate, and 2 years back, the SECP has recognized the development of inclusive insurance market as our strategic objective as well. So I think definitely if your organization or regulator recognizes that the inclusive insurance market development is your organizational goal and your strategic plan, so obviously it helps you to work in that direction here.
Maybe I'll touch base back with Gilles about the question of the linkage between financial inclusion and microinsurance in this context, because there's a sort of the broader question of financial inclusion as against the narrow discussion we have in this group focusing on the insurance aspect. How do you see those as being connected to solving some of these problems?
Yeah, so I mean, to me, financial inclusion means having access to a product and understanding the product. So I put the financial inclusion, I add the financial education. So that's really important, so that the clients actually know and can make the decisions there. So I saw also the question from Catherine going there in terms of the financial inclusion mandate of regulators. I think if I may say so, and Nayyar, you're saying will tell me if you disagree, but I think the main issue is that regulators tend to work in a more long-term basis, because they give the, they have consumer protection, they have mandates about the solvency of insurance companies, the stability of the market, and also the financial inclusion. And the financial inclusion goes via a number of things. It can go into school issues, into how girls and boys can actually be educated in school about financial products and about the access to the information that they're having. And so in the COVID situation, what we have seen being exacerbated is the ability for the low-income segment to get proper information and finding the right information about COVID and finding ways of navigating where they're going. And we had very moving interviews with some clients who say, when the COVID hit, like everyone was saying, this is coming from God. If it's hitting you like really bad social norms are not bad per se, but the impact of the social norms on COVID hitting had a negative impact because people were scared, they didn't know where to find information. So I really think this is where regulators, and because they're also embedded in governments and in lawmakers that can actually work at this level and try to get the financial education done. But I think it's such a long-term issue to get the right information. What I do believe is that as COVID information channels are being created into the low income, and I mean, we're seeing that by governments really trying to reach out to the informal sector with COVID information. I think we should think of piggybacking on the information about what are the products that could be available, and giving them actually all the information they need to get that financial inclusion in financial education.
And I see we also have a question regarding the possibility of perhaps the linkage between providing products standalone as against bundled. And I know you talked about this a little bit, Rehan, but you might like to talk a bit more about just exactly how important you think bundling is in the context of solving the kind of issues that we're seeing.
No, I think, and I think it relates to the earlier question, Craig, that financial inclusion, COVID, and all that, and insurance in the middle of all that. So I think, I mean, this is another aspect which COVID has proven, right? So people, all of us know that the bundling thing with the loans and all that. So there has been an ongoing debate: is that like an insurance being sold, or it's an insurance being wrapped around the borrower is actually getting a loan, they don't know about insurance, and and then you get into the discussion of how much are you making them aware of the insurance they got as part of the loan and all. Now, when the COVID hit the business and all that, so and for example, we are a very active player in MFI insurance and all, so we realized that the lenders have stopped lending, or they have curtailed lending to a great degree, and then we had to keep continuing, right? We opened up, the paid insurance channels, and that was the results are remarkable. So I think another aspect which COVID has proven is that if you unwrap the product, if you unbundle it from a loan or from any other thing, then people still they respond. Now, I got to be very careful what I say, right? So but the response was only for a short period of time. That's something we need to keep in mind, right? So the market we are targeting, they are when people, they're not if people, and insurance is an if product, right? So we are thinking that probably the way we respond to COVID, a man in the street also respond, or a woman in the farm also respond to that, to it like that. It's not the case. We experimented every day. So the 10 health policies you sell, if 2 people have claimed, they will call you for their renewal of their policy, because there couldn't be anything better than that product. You paid 1, you got 100. But the 8 who don't claim, they don't renew. And they say that I didn't go to the hospital. And they forget the fact that if they didn't go to the hospital, they can go in the next year. Now, flood. It's a once in a 10-year event. So when it happens, every farmer wants to insure their field. Second year reduces, third reduces. Ninth year, nobody wants to insure their field. They say it's a waste of money, there's no flood. So my view is that the pandemic is once in a century event, right? God willing, it won't happen in our lifetime again. However, the aspect is that it has showed something, right? So like we discussed that it's very strongly linked with the financial inclusion, and it has demonstrated that people can pay money for buying insurance. Now, with this in mind, they might not buy the same product we offered them in June or in May when the COVID was at its peaks. But maybe we bring something else for them, right? Maybe we go back to them and we ask them what they want, and they'll probably pay for it. So in my opinion, certainly unbundling is possible. Insurance can be sold as insurance, and it can be sold through digital channels. That's, I think, a strong learning from COVID.
I think one of the things that we haven't really touched upon so far, and that's the possibility of pandemic insurance being provided on some kind of index basis. And so I do have another polling question, which I'll ask the facilitators to stick up. This polling question is directed at something which I thought we might touch on a little bit sooner. We have a little bit, but not quite so much. And that's whether or not the audience thinks that we'll actually see a sort of a dedicated cover for epidemics and pandemics in the future. And I've given you some options here to enable you to perhaps share your opinion, and you can be quite speculative. One of them is to say, well, yes, I think it's going to be required because that's what customers want. Secondly, we'll say, no, customers aren't really interested in this. They're interested in other things if it comes right down to it. If they have a choice of 5 things and limited resources, this is not going to be what they pick. Another possibility, you could say, well, look, despite what the customers think, insurers, will they do it, or will they say, no, we can't do that? That's something. Will they find a way to do it? And then the third option is, will the governments get involved and help to cover the risk? Or even if the government does get involved, it won't happen because insurers will say, look, we're not going to take up that option. And then there's the last one, which is basically says, well, look, this is all something that I don't know. It's too early to tell. I really don't know either way. So you have to pick one of these choices, which is the biggest driving one for what you think will happen in the future, and whether we'll see pandemic cover or epidemic cover going forward. Perhaps we'll have a look at the results and see what we've got in terms of responses. And the results will come up. And it looks like the strongest answer is we will see it, and that's because that's what customers want. And I think that's a really, really great answer to have to sort of wind things up, because, a lot of what we've been talking about, and I think what often goes right or goes wrong, particularly in inclusive insurance, is whether or not we actually understand and meet the needs of customers. And so I think, we've got a history over the years of having really good examples of that happening, and another history of where it hasn't worked so well, probably because we never really understood the customers all that well. And I think that's a fantastic, it's good to see. But also that, there's more yeses than nos on all accounts there, that insurers will find a way to do it, that governments will help, and that we will have solutions to these many challenges. So there's not that much in the way of skepticism there, but it is an open question. And so the panel hasn't managed to convince everybody of the prospects for responding to this in a uniform way. And I think that's probably because we're still, definitely going through this. There's a long way to go. It's just we've come a long way. I'd like to thank my panel for tremendous contribution and interesting perspectives on this changing feast that we're in the middle of. I'd like to thank everybody for their engagement in the polling. As I said before, we'll have the slides and the video and a fuller version of the video as well available for people after the after the seminar. And at this point, I'd like to thank my panelists, and I'm going to hand back to Dirk for some closing housekeeping remarks. Thanks very much, Dirk.
Well, thank you very much to all the panelists, and thank you to all the participants, and thank you to you, Craig, for a very interesting session. I would like to invite each and everyone to join the next session, which starts at 4 p.m. conference time, about pricing inclusive insurance in the midst of a pandemic. And then also do not forget, this conference continues tomorrow as well. So thanks to everyone, and have a good coffee break.
Cool.